Webinar From Meeting Notes to Enterprise Workflows, Building AI Infrastructure that Scales. I'm Johnny Swift of Impact Communications, and I'll be your host today for this insightful webinar featuring John O'Connell of the Oasis Group and Chirag Gandhi of Mili, who will discuss how wealth management enterprises are moving beyond AI pilots to build scalable, connected infrastructure that delivers measurable impact. So a quick intro to each of our guests before we get started. Chirag Gandhi is the co-founder and CEO of Mili, which is an AI platform that helps wealth management firms transform client conversations into actionable data across onboarding, planning, and operational workflows. And John O'Connell is the founder of the Oasis Group, a leading consultancy for the wealth management industry, offering award-winning consulting services, industry-leading research, and compelling on-demand training. So thank you both for joining me today. And one quick note before we jump in, we're going to hold all audience questions until the end. But for our audience members, if you do have any questions, please submit them either in the chat box or in the questions section of your GoToWebinar control panel. So with that, I want to jump right into the conversation. We have a lot to discuss. And John, I want to start with you. So from your consulting work across the industry, where do you see firms getting stuck between AI pilots and AI infrastructure? And what's the common breaking point?
I think there's a couple. The first one is a lack of really clear goals when they're putting together their AI pilots. So a lot of folks say, well, I don't know if AI is giving me the return on investment. Well, one of the recommendations we have is that you measure upfront what you're trying to accomplish. So how long is it taking your team member to do this today, right? Whether that's, like with note taking, if you've got 3 team members that are sitting in the meeting and you can figure out what those team members cost by taking their fully loaded cost, that would be their annual salary plus the expenses that you have for like their computer and their desk and all that other stuff, healthcare. Take all that, put it together, that will give you fully loaded cost. Take that fully loaded cost, divide it by 2080, because that's the number of billable hours in a year, and that will give you what their hourly rate is. So if you've got 3 people sitting in a meeting, take those 3 people, multiply it by their hourly rate, and that's going to give you what your cost is per client meeting today. So now if you can eliminate 2 of those people from the client meeting, then it's pretty easy to figure out what your return on investment is, right? Take those 2 people's costs, take it out, minus the cost for the technology, and there you go. That's your ROI. And you can figure that out relatively quickly. What we find with a lot of these pilot programs that are happening is they're not measuring ROI up front, and because of that, they've got dubious results. They're like, I don't know if this artificial intelligence project has been successful, right? So that's number one. And number 2, what we find is people underestimate the iterative process of a pilot program. A pilot is not like I develop it and I'm done, and then I put it in production. That's going to production. That's not a pilot program. A pilot program is really there for you to learn how to be successful in the next iteration. So what you're supposed to do is make your mistakes early in a pilot program, learn how to take that program and make it better in your second iteration, and then put it in production. What we find that's happening right now is a lot of artificial intelligence pilots are dying directly after the pilot. They do the pilot and they kill the project. And that's really not what the pilot's there for. So it doesn't really make good economic sense for the firm to do that. We would recommend do the pilot, understand your learning coming out of the pilot, and then do your second iteration and get closer to moving something to production. Also, a lot of people don't measure that up front. They're not going into that pilot with some specific goals. For example, if you're going to start putting together a light AI agent, right? One of the goals of the pilot is to learn how to create an AI agent. And then the second goal would be, what kind of results are we getting and how do we iterate on them? Then you do your second iteration and then maybe you're ready for production. So I think a lot of why these AI pilots are, quote, failing is a lack of planning and a lack of clarity around what are the goals of the program, what's the ROI I'm trying to achieve, and then how do I measure it? And if you can start with those things, I think you're going to have a much more successful AI pilot.
So Chirag, most firms started their AI journey with meeting note transcription and summarization. When advisors capture client conversations, What are the most valuable data points that tend to get lost or underutilized? And what should operations leaders be thinking about when it comes to structuring that information?
That's a great question, Johnny. And when we started a couple of years back, everybody was excited by the obvious stuff, right? What are the action items in the meeting? What are the portfolio changes? What are the life events? But in all of this, what was still getting lost is the gold that was actually hiding in plain sight for these firms, and which is relationship intelligence. So when our client actually mentions that their daughter has just started at Northwestern, or they're worrying about their aging parents in Florida, right? That's not small talk, and that's not just about building a relationship, but those are trust signals. Those are referral opportunities. Those can be future planning triggers. And all of these going back into how do we serve the client better? And if advisors would scribble it into their notepad, it would disappear into the void like that, right? So that's what firms are excited about getting on cloud with Mili. Second is the compliance story. So firms realize that every time there is hesitation in meetings, like, let me think about that, right? Or, well, I'm not very sure about if we should be investing our capital somewhere. That's actually documenting risk and risk tolerance. So are we able to convert conversations into live dynamic risk scores that, again, is independent of some survey that we would run once in a few years? And that's very important, right? But I think the real kicker is when you think about this in an offensive manner and not just defensive, and that becomes all the revenue signals. So as we've now worked through hundreds of thousands of meetings on the platform, there are 3 to 4 opportunities per client meeting that come up. And they don't present themselves very obviously, like, hey, we are selling our business next year. But these subtle mentions, which never get captured properly, are millions in AUM that are sitting, sort of waiting for advisors to sort of tap on. And those are all the things that we are now seeing the industry evolve towards from just notes and action items a couple of years back.
You know, Johnny, if I can, I want to build on the second point that Chirag made, which I think is incredibly important, right? In a lot of firms today, we'll run a RTQ, a risk tolerance questionnaire, once a year with a client. Well, the reality of it is the client's risk changes fairly dynamically throughout the year based on just events that happen in their lives, right? Maybe a parent takes a fall and now they're worried about, you know, do I need to financially support that parent moving forward? Or they'll have medical bills that are going to exceed what their current income is because they're on a fixed income in retirement. These are things that dynamically change the risk profile of your client. Your client didn't fall, but your client is definitely going to be thinking about, well, my parent fell and there's these medical bills. Am I preparing myself for these kind of medical bills? I'm probably going to fall at some point when I get older. So how those risks are going to change the way the client views their risk in a dynamic nature. And I think the days of the RTQ are numbered. With all of the artificial intelligence we have coming out at this point, with these dynamic conversations that advisors are having with their clients, the days of this fixed RTQ, I think, are over, quite frankly. And, you know, tools like Mili and like some of these other tools that you see emerging in the marketplace today really do have an ability to surface that intelligence for you in a way that you never had before. Before, you didn't have any choice. You were either relying on the advisor coming out of the meeting and going, I think the client's risk may have changed based on this. And that takes a lot of experience. For younger advisors who are taking over practices or are just breaking away, you know, from a wirehouse, they may not have that innate guidance or that experience to say, this may be changing my client's risk. Maybe I should have a further conversation with them around this. So I definitely wanted to highlight that because I think that's a gem. I think a lot of people look at note-taking as the action items, as Chirag, you started out saying, right? The action items are great, but there are so many more things you can do now by capturing this information to dynamically look at their risk, to dynamically come up with new opportunities that are coming out of the meeting that in the past were probably lost in CRM notes. You know, you copy the notes, you put them in your CRM, and you kind of forgot about them. They're lost at that point there. And these new tools really do have an ability to surface those for you.
Absolutely.
So, John, also, like not every AI workflow makes sense for every firm. So how should a 10 advisor RIA think about AI infrastructure differently than a 100 advisor enterprise firm? And like, what are the must-haves versus nice-to-haves at these different scales?
You know, I think the smaller firms, we're hearing a lot of people trying to think about what do I want to do with agents or what do I want to automate next, so to speak. And I think too many firms, especially on the smaller side, are like, well, I have a note taker. Check that box, we're done. And I think that that's actually missing the value of what you get from some of these tools. You know, a 100-person firm is looking for different levels of efficiency. They may be looking for efficiencies in document processing, right? I've got lots and lots of documents coming in from clients, and I need to process all these documents. They're going to be looking at ways to either do document ingestion, document interrogation, right? They're looking for ways to automate parts of the financial planning process, as an example. When you think of the smaller firms, the 10-person firm, they're not taking on hundreds of clients a month. You know, they're taking on maybe 3, 4 clients a month, net new clients. And that may even be a lot for a 10-person firm. In our experience, that would be a lot for a 10-person firm to take on 2 or 3 new clients every month. So that document processing problem is not as big of a problem for them. What should they be looking at? I think they should be really looking at, how do I mine this data that I'm now capturing, right? How do I, for example, how do I look for new opportunities with my existing client to deepen the relationship, right? Or to offer more financial advice. You know, maybe my client is sitting there saying, hey, I'm really, you know, my parent fell, let's keep that example. I'm a little concerned about this. Have you talked to your client about setting up an HSA, as an example, right? Where they could start saving now and make that a product that they have the ability to capitalize on or utilize later in life. So those are opportunities that I think that are coming out of these notes and things like that you could utilize much more fully. So my recommendation for firms that are like in that 10 to 20 person range, don't simply say, I've got a note taker, I checked that box, I'm getting action, it's great. You should really be looking at, now you're capturing this data. What are you doing to mine this data, right? To find existing opportunities with your clients or to find new opportunities for referrals, right? So if your client mentions, oh, I just joined a new golf club and it's great. Referral opportunity, they're going to be meeting people at the golf club that they just joined. So how do you arm them with the information that they would need to say something nice about you to a person they just met, right? How do you provide them with that kind of narrative? And I think those are all opportunities that are coming out of the notes that people are capturing with the note-taking application that are left untapped. So I agree that there are 2 different problem sets they're trying to solve for. The bigger firms can solve for volume of onboarding a client. The smaller firms don't have that problem. They need to think elsewhere. How do I generate more referrals? How do I deepen the relationship? How do I offer my existing clients more, more capabilities? And I think that's something they really need to focus on.
So Chirag, when evaluating which workflows to automate first, what's your framework for identifying what will actually move the needle? And where do you typically see the highest ROI in wealth management?
So what we have seen, Johnny, now working with hundreds of advice firms is that beyond the point, advice firms should not care about AI. What they should now start caring about really is outcomes, right? And if you think about them, they boil down to one of 2 things. One is essentially saving time, and the second is driving your book and growth in the firm. Now, saving time in practices have multiple implications, right? Like, one, we are not trying to save time for saving time's sake. Are we further reinvesting that time in actually growing the book of business as well? And 2, does it mean that we can now sort of take on more clients per advisor? Or are we accelerating the number of advisors that can be supported by the same support staff ecosystem that we have built, right? So that's the goodness that we have seen coming from that. And 2, on growing the book of business, Are we identifying more opportunities? Are we serving our clients in a way that we were not able to serve them in the past? And I think to John's point, the true value now lies in that data set, right? It's when you are able to access your meeting documentation, which you were not able to in the past, when you're able to access all the metadata from documents that are sitting in your SharePoint or a box, when you're able to actually have all your systems talk to each other. So you do not have a view of the client on the CRM that's different than your custodian, that's different than your financial planning software. It's the same client. They're just living in different ecosystems, right? So how do you bring all of that in one place and accelerate value for them? And that starts at meetings, but really quickly then moves on to onboarding, prospecting. And to John's point, a lot can be said about what makes sense for what size and maturity of a firm. Typically, we see smaller the firm, higher is the focus on organic growth, higher is the interest towards prospecting, business development, because inorganic growth is not an option that's available to them, right? Larger the firm, larger they are thinking about, I'm backed by private equity, or I want to establish a certain enterprise value. How do I go from 2 CSA per advisor to 3 CSA per advisor, or the other way around, right? But how do I expand that so that I am not a 5 times EBITDA business, I'm a 30 times EBITDA business? And that difference is a lot of enterprise value that can be unlocked, right? So that's what we are excited working with our partners.
So, John, I want to talk about the messy middle. So most firms have legacy systems, multiple CRMs, just data scattered everywhere. So how do you approach building AI infrastructure when the existing tech stack is far from perfect?
I think that the fact that the tech stacks are not well integrated has been the case now for decades, right? So I think recently a lot of folks have said to me, well, AI is going to solve that problem. I don't think it's going to solve that problem, to be honest with you. I think it'll make it easier to move data between applications, but it's not going to solve the problem. AI is not a silver bullet that is all of a sudden going to integrate these applications for you for a variety of reasons, right? Number one, many of the applications don't have a robust integration capability, right? They don't have really solid application programming interfaces or APIs that you can tap into. Many of them, you can get data out of them, but you can't put data into them because their integration paradigm is to send data someplace else. And you find that with a lot of the wealth platforms, right? The wealth platforms are used to sending data to financial planning, not bringing data back in from financial planning. So I don't think that AI is going to solve that problem. There's more pressing issues for a lot of those software firms to keep up with feature functions that they're seeing emerge from their competitors. So I don't think they're going to invest a lot there. So where does that leave us? It leaves us at a point where it really does come back to the questions that Chirag mentioned a moment ago. You're either going to try to find a way to drive efficiencies in the business or to grow the business. And I think that a lot of firm leadership needs to take a step back and decide what do they want to focus on right now, right? And you're probably familiar with the old adage of, are we driving advisor efficiency or client efficiency, right? There was that pendulum. I think that pendulum's actually shifting. And I think it's not, do I want to drive advisor efficiency or client efficiency? I think that pendulum's now shifting to, do I want to drive growth or efficiency within the business? Do I want to service more clients with the same people I have, which is efficiency? Or do I want to grow my client base? And I want to go out there and find more clients. And I think that what we're going to be seeing is this emergence where smaller firms, are probably going to want to drive better efficiency within the organization. They're not going to want to hire a ton of people at this point. They're bootstrapping it. So every hire is pretty expensive. So they're going to try to make their teams more efficient. Larger firms are going to be really focused on client growth, right? And they're going to be really focused on, how do I grow my client base? How do I attract more clients? You see that with the emergence of AI prospecting tools. Large firms will buy AI prospecting tools to identify prospects and try to go after them. They're also building an infrastructure with a business development team, right? A BDR team that you don't see in smaller firms. So I think when you take a look at the messy middle at this point, it does come back to what kind of problem are you trying to solve and what ROI are you going to get from it, right? If you've got a problem today where you need to extract data and put it into financial planning applications so that you can build more efficient financial plans, go measure what's the level of effort to do that, determine what you can get from an ROI by using artificial intelligence to take data out of the system, change it, right, which is like an ETL process, and then push it into your financial planning system. Or work with your financial planning system. How do I build, for example, you can build a web page very, very easily on your website that will capture all the data that you want and put that data into a small database. Very inexpensive to do this. You can stand it up. You can actually have Claude write all the code for you to build the database and the web page, right? So now you've got this data. How do I get that into my financial planning application? That could drive efficiency for you, especially if you do a lot of back and forth with clients to determine, hey, my advisor had a meeting with you, but I'm still missing these 10 other pieces of documentation that I need to open an account, right? So how do I get that from you? So I would take a look at what does your business process look like today? And that's really hard because you got to take a step back and not look at the shiny penny of the technology. You really have to figure out what's my business process look like? How do I make that more efficient? And then how do I solve for that? And solving for it is where you're going to play with really cool technology and figure this whole thing out. But taking a step back, that's pretty important. So if you've got a messy middle, just because it's messy doesn't mean it's bad necessarily. You've got to figure out what needs to work for your firm. And then that's how you determine what your use cases are going to be. And then once you have the use cases, go look at technology to solve for those.
So Chirag, what role does data quality play? If a firm's existing CRM data is messy and unorganized, does that prevent them from implementing AI infrastructure effectively?
Well, Johnny, I think like my therapist would tell me, the first step is always acknowledgement. And I think this is the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about, right? We've had countless advice firms tell us our CRM is where the data goes to die, right? And it does not see the light of the day after that. And it's not that they're wrong, they are just, and they're also not stuck, right? The thing is, data is the fuel for AI, right? We need a stream of high quality data for any form of agentic capabilities to really work on top. And you also can't be waiting for perfect data to start with AI, or you will be waiting forever. Like John mentioned earlier, there is a lot of data debt in the industry. There are years of inconsistent entries, duplicate records, missing fields. On the ground, even for something as trivial as trying to answer queries on a CRM, if you were to ask Mili, I want to get a list of all my clients in Portland, Oregon, right? Mili would have to ask you, are we referring to the billing state? Are we referring to the shipping state, the primary address or the secondary address, right? And those are all the fields that live in your CRM. So good luck figuring that. And I think the day we do that, we would have AGI for this industry, right? So I think that's an important a problem. And the good thing is firms are experimenting with different approaches. On one hand, you have the approach of data lakes, where the thesis is, it's inaccurate, but let's get everything in one place. So we don't have to update it at multiple places, right? It goes someplace in solving this problem, but doesn't go the whole way because you still have to correct that, right? Even in that infrastructure. And there are firms that, and like we've been trying to solve it with, is we'll spend that time with you to understand what's where, right? We will solve it one system at a time. And as long as we can continue and be at it, eventually we'll be able to build that map with leveraging the best of what we have with AI. And this progressive data remediation is what we will need as we progress. We cannot renovate the whole house to just like fix this leaky faucet that we have. We'll improve it room by room, and that's how firms can use it eventually.
And just to build on what Chirag is saying, you can leverage artificial intelligence to clean up things like those messy addresses, right? Take an export of what you have in your CRM, and if you do insurance, take an export of the insurance policies and take an export of what you have in your custodian and compare them. And you can come up very quickly with a hit list that needs to go back to the advisor to say which is the correct address. And if the correct address happens to be in the CRM, well, now you need to do change of address forms for the other systems to make sure that they're now correct. So there's ways to clean up the data, and artificial intelligence can help a lot with that. But to another point that Chirag made a moment ago, there's a lot of data still locked up in CRMs that has gone there to die. If you're trying to prepare for a client meeting, export all that data into a text file and ask artificial intelligence to help you prepare for a client meeting. That's a way to go about it. Other than, and we're seeing a lot of firms right now, by the way, that are just snapping a chalk line and saying, I'm going to now rely on what I'm getting in my note taker to help me prepare for my next client meeting, and my CRM data is probably out of date anyway. I've got 10 years of client history of meetings with my client in there. Well, when I first started working with this client, their child was 6, and their child was now 16 and getting ready for college. Completely different set of problems they're trying to solve for now, right? So just because you have that data in the CRM, is it useful? No, probably not. So how do you distill that data into something that's really actionable moving forward? And I think what we're seeing with a lot of smaller firms at this point is they're taking that really old CRM data, they're exporting it out, they're creating a client summary, then they're going into their meeting with the client and going, hey, I looked at all of our history together. I got a couple of questions for you, and let's run through that. That now is getting captured in the note taker product. And now they've snapped the chalk line. Everything in the CRM, not relevant anymore, because they took that summary, had it in a meeting with the client, validated all these points, and now that all exists in the note taker moving forward, which is much more structured data. It's a lot cleaner, and now I can use that and move forward with that with my client. So I think you're going to see more and more enterprising firms do that, because the data that's in the CRM in many cases is old, dated, and probably of dubious value.
So, John, another one for you here. What questions should firms be asking vendors when evaluating AI infrastructure solutions, and what are the red flags to watch out for?
I think one of the things you should definitely be asking is, where does my data go when I give it to you, right? So as an example, if I give my data to Mili, where does it go after Mili? And Chirag's got a really good infrastructure around his product, so he can basically outline for you exactly where each step of the data is going after that. And I think that that's really important. As you're seeing more and more artificial intelligence roll out with incumbent products, you've got to ask those questions. Okay, so you've added an AI chatbot capability in your product. That's great. So your product has a lot of my PII in it for my clients, right? My personally identifiable information of my clients is sitting in your product. So now that you've implemented this chatbot, Mr. and Mrs. Incumbent product, where does my data go? Does that chatbot have access to all the PII that's sitting in your system? And if it does, where's that stored? Where's that information stored moving forward? Is that in some open source AI capability that you're leveraging to create your chatbot? And then where does my data go from there? So if I've entered my data into your product, and then your product is using a chatbot to answer questions on my data, is that chatbot open source? And if so, where is my data stored after I've asked and answered that question? And I think for the firms that you're finding that are AI first, that you see on our AI wealth technology map that the Oasis Group produces, those firms have a very solid answer. They know where that data is going. They've built it. For the firms that are incumbent, I think that what we've found so far is some of those answers are, I need to get back to you. And that's a security concern that you really need to be focused on if you're going to be consuming these AI technologies moving forward. And let's face it, you're not going to have a choice. Whether you implement a product like Mili or you have an incumbent product that you have, even the Microsoft Copilot, that's out there right now, right? Microsoft Copilot Chat is now included on every Microsoft license. So, that's ring fenced. You can go in and take a look at where Microsoft is storing your data, and that's pretty ring fenced at this point. Other incumbent products, you need to ask the question, where's that data going?
So, Chirag, what would you say are the biggest technical or operational misconceptions that firms have when they start thinking about implementing AI infrastructure? And what do people consistently underestimate?
So, Johnny, what we have seen is a lot of times firms approach buying AI like they would approach buying legacy software, right? And to no fault of theirs, because the products are priced like a software, sold like a software, and honestly, you struggle to tell the difference. But the reality is, this is the first time where um, you like nobody knows what would come out on the other side once you use the tools, right? Like not the creators, not the models that the creators are using, and that's an interesting paradigm shift, right? And anybody that tells you that what we have works for you 100% of the time is will take you for a ride. And I think that's the biggest misconception, which now further has multiple underlying things to take care of, which is how do you customize that scale, right? And for hundreds of advice firms we work with, we've created a playbook where we can really work with them in understanding what are the different meeting types they have, right? What are all the things that matter to them in their meetings, and what do they want captured versus not in these meeting setups. And that's very important. And that's something that they should be asking any AI provider really, which is how do I have our firm's preferences mapped to your product? So that's definitely number one. And the second uh, is uh, is really going below all the AI hype and saying what are the outcomes that we are building towards, right? And it's very hard in this in the current times where every vendor that you're already using is also adding AI, right? And internally we would have a double quotes around AI or um, uh, AI roadmap that the firms have. But if you have 7 different models, right? And let's say ask XYZ and ask ABC, and these AI models don't talk to each other, you are back in the same problem with software, which is the data was in silos and you could never really unlock it. So I think that's just chaos with a fancy name. So that's something that would be very, very about. So the second misconception is that you can create value in isolation without talking to other systems. And that means, can we pick open vendors and vendors that show that openness to partner and integrate with other tools? Because that's necessarily the world we are headed in.
Johnny, I want to underscore something that Chirag mentioned a moment ago, right? And I want to make sure that everyone that's listening to this really, hears what he said. When you're using an artificial intelligence tool, if you ask it the same question twice, you're likely to get a slightly different answer each time you've asked it that question. The reason is it's building on its memory, it's interpreting what you've said, right? So it's trying to iterate to get to a better answer for you. So when you're looking to partner with an AI firm to roll out a piece of artificial intelligence in your organization, as a wealth manager, there are 3 things you got to look for. Number 1, do I have a firm that I can partner with? Because as Chirag mentioned a moment ago, not every meeting is the same. You're going to go through a configuration process to configure, these are my types of meetings, these are the things that I want to capture, and you're going to get better results more consistently through that configuration. So number 1, you need to find a firm that will work with you on the configuration. Number 2, you're not buying software like you would normally buy. This is not that the software, the workflow that you have in existing software and the workflow you're going to have within an AI piece of software are going to be different. AI software needs to be much more prescriptive. So you need to tell it every one of the steps. If you've got gaps in your business process and you try to implement an artificial intelligence tool, it is going to try to figure out how to get from point A to point C. It's going to make up point B if you didn't tell it what it is. And it may make it up in a way that you are getting inconsistent results. So you've got to be much more prescriptive. So number one, find a firm that you can work with. Number two, understand that the configuration of the software is different than what you would normally be used to with a custom off-the-shelf software product that you've implemented for the past 30 years. And number three, know that your workflows need to be really strong when you sit down to implement that artificial intelligence with the firm. Now, I'm a big fan. I'm more of a fan of AI first companies than I am of incumbent software companies implementing artificial intelligence. The reason is an incumbent software company has a defined technical support model. You get weird results, open a tech support ticket. That's not where we are with artificial intelligence today. You cannot just open a support ticket because you've gotten some strange results. You actually need to talk to people that are working with the model to be able to get a better result set. So I'm more of a fan right now of AI first companies because they understand that support model, whereas incumbent software companies are expecting you to open a ticket, and that's just simply not where we are with the adoption of this technology at the moment.
That makes sense. So, John, last question that I have for you here, and then we're going to move to some audience questions. I see a couple in the panel. If you have any questions, please submit them either via the chat or the questions tab. But John, let me pose this to you. For an executive or operations leader watching this who wants to move from exploration to execution, what should their 90-day plan look like, and where do they start?
I think if you're taking a look at the 90-day plan, the first thing you should do within that plan is to identify use cases where you can clearly outline the level of effort you're expending today and what your expected ROI is going to be. Okay. The second is identify gaps within those use cases. So once I've said, normally when the Oasis Group walks someone through this, the first thing we'll do is we'll hold an executive meeting and brainstorm through use cases. We'll come up with probably 10 to 15 use cases. And then what we do is we say, okay, which of these use cases are measurable, right? Which ones can we clearly define? Here's the level of effort today, so that when we get to the other side, here's the level of effort, we can measure an ROI. So that's the second piece. That will normally reduce the number of use cases from just brainstorming all the way down to maybe 8 to 10 really solid use cases. And then what you do is you say, okay, which of these use cases either A, has a clearly defined set of processes today, and the answer is normally 0, right? And how many can we clearly define the processes around this? So that will normally get you from like 10 use cases down to probably 5 to 8 use cases. Now you've got a project. Now you've got something that you can really focus on. I can measure it. I have an expected ROI. I know I can get the processes documented. Your next step, document those processes. That's going to generate for you a must-have, should-have, could-have, and won't-have list, a Moscow list. These are the things that this artificial intelligence technology needs to do for me to achieve the benefits of that ROI. Once you have that, talk to a bunch of vendors. Whether you use the AI map that we have from the Oasis Group, or you go out and try to source vendors yourself, send them that Moscow list and say, which can you accomplish today? Which are you willing to work with us on to accomplish? And that's going to bring you a short list of vendors. And then go through working with them on generating a pilot, or go into contract with them, and then start your pilot project. So if I break that down into the 30, 60, 90, your first 30 days, brainstorm your use cases, come up with a set of use cases, identify which ones you can measure, identify which ones you can document. The next 30 days, document the use cases, generate your Moscow list, and find your short list of vendors. And then the final 30 days, launch your pilot, measure your results, and determine, does this make sense for me to go to full production? Some firms can accomplish that in 90 days. Other firms may need 120 days or maybe even 180 days, depending on the firm. But I would recommend that you do this really between that 90 and 120 days. If you're getting beyond a quarter in trying to do this project, you might be boiling the ocean a little too much. So I would say you're looking at really between 90 and 120 days to have real measurable results using artificial intelligence and having a way to roll that out much more broadly throughout the firm.
Chirag, anything to add before we move to our audience questions?
Yeah, I think John covered the necessary steps and a lot of pitfalls. I think a few things I would add is at the very start, it's important to actually talk to your people before you start talking to vendors, right? And this is something that we specifically see with 100 plus, 200 plus advisor teams. And there is a lot to be learned from just shadowing your advisors for a few days, right? Or shadowing your CSAs for a couple of days. And not what the process manual is saying, but what's actually happening on the ground. So a lot of these high impact workflows just get uncovered in that discovery process. The second is creating the right beta group or a design partner group. That's very important. And that does depend on the use case. Now, when it comes to our meeting agent, what we recommend is having your best note takers and your worst note takers, right? The best note takers set the quality bar. And really, that's the quality of note taking where you want to emulate AI and get to. And that becomes the consistent client service delivery that you're able to offer. But at the same time, you do want to see the goodness of AI, right? You want to see if technology laggards in the team also would adopt this. And at the core, AI is still a human problem. It's not a technology problem. It's about driving these behaviors, making those changes meaningfully. And having a beta group that is a microcosm of your entire team is very helpful. And the last is measuring religiously, measuring every day, right? Having baseline metrics and target metrics for everything. It's easy to talk in sort of qualitative ways, but I think where rubber hits the road is, are we actually saving time on every task? Are we reducing the error rates? Are we improving our client responses? So those are all important. And after all of this is done, firms are making a decision of building versus buying, especially in the age of AI, where building MVP versions is extremely easy, right? And I think it really boils down to the problem that you're trying to solve. Will it take 20 ML engineers for a few years to build out a product, right? That's one. And second, is this a product that is better off built for the industry or specifically for your firm because it's a custom problem? And wherever it's the former, the recommendation would be to find a partner, because the partner is consistently improving with, and let's say it's a meeting agent, right? They're consistently improving with every piece of meeting that they're documenting on the platform. And therefore, it makes for a good use case to partner somebody with versus trying to build that internally. So those are some additional points, but I think, yeah, John did an exceptional job just covering all the different parts.
So let's move to a couple audience questions before we wrap up for today. So first one here, how much should we budget for all of this? Not just the technology, but the full costs, including integration, training, and maintenance.
Chirag, you want to hit that one first, and then I can hit it right after you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way we look at it, Johnny, is let's say the anchor use case is meetings, which is what we have generally seen when it comes to AI and what we solve for firms. Typically, the pricing really starts at anything from $700 to $1,500 per advisor, or per primary seat. So anybody that needs to take notes in meetings. So if you are a 50 advisor team, you are looking at like a 50 to a 70K all in for the first year, right? To get this right. Beyond this, if you are setting up a technology lab, you are setting up a platform, that could be an incremental sort of 20 to 30K, right? And in all of this, it's hard to measure, but there is always some organizational therapy, right? Which is just helping your teams actually change how they work and investing in those processes as well. That's intangible. And on the ROI side, we typically look at anywhere from like 5x to 20x of that spend right in year one. And in use cases like meetings, the setup can just take 5 minutes really, and you can see the value coming in right from the first meeting. So that is what makes it extremely compelling, and which is why we've seen the kind of rapid and rampant growth in this particular use case. Beyond this, as you roll other agents, it does become extremely specific to what you're solving for. And like I mentioned, right, the blueprint is very much defined by the firms on what they want to achieve out of this project. We oftentimes see projects going anywhere from 100K to 1 million, especially for some of the larger enterprises out there.
I actually think that the numbers Chirag gave were really spot on. It depends very widely on what use case you're trying to solve for, but I think that the estimates that he provided are directionally very, very strong.
Perfect. Next one here. So how do you build the business case internally for this investment? This person says it sometimes feels like it's hard to get everyone to buy in. So what resonates with executive teams and boards?
So I think that, Chirag, if it's okay, I'll take that one first. So, I've been speaking at a lot of conferences this year about artificial intelligence, and many people have grabbed me after my speaking about this topic. How do I get my executive team to buy in on this? And I think the real key is to put together that ROI up front, right? Executive teams will spend money to drive efficiencies, right? Because ultimately they know they're saving money with the efficiency that they're driving. So for a lot of the organizations that are struggling with where do I use AI, I think to say I'm going to use AI to grow the business is a little bit of a bridge too far for organizations that are more cautious in moving into this area. So focus on the ROI. Look at, even if you were brainstorming with yourself and just a couple of colleagues, come up with a bunch of ideas of where you think artificial intelligence can help the business. And then try to determine what your existing costs are. Executives love it when you can come to them with a business case that says, here's how I'm going to measure my existing spend, and here's what I'm going to hope to achieve. And I'm asking for this amount of money to pilot this or to go through a discovery process. That's a fairly easy business case for someone to make a decision on. So, and then if you really want to put tinsel on the tree, so to speak, with that business case, walk through what some of the risks are and how you plan to address those risks moving forward. So the elephant in the room is my data going to be protected if I use artificial intelligence? Call that out in your business case and say you plan to work with the vendors to answer that question. Then an executive team knows that you're trying to figure out an ROI, you're asking the right questions, you're also opening it up and giving them an opportunity to add their questions to it. Sometimes executives like to have their fingerprint on something, so they may add questions to your questionnaire for the AI vendor, which is fine. Get those questions in there then and make sure that you can get them answered. So my recommendation, start with a good business case, call out the questions that are the elephant in the room, like where's my data going and is it protected? Have a really solid understanding of how you're going to measure success and present that to your executive team. And hopefully they'll move forward with it. If they don't, you're learning something about their risk appetite for sure.
So last question here, from a compliance perspective, are there any regulatory considerations we need to address or be aware of when implementing AI solutions?
So I'll jump in first, and then Chirag, I'd love to get your perspective on it. I mean, the regulatory environment right now is undefined for most of the artificial intelligence. There's been some guidance that have come out, but there's no really good hard and fast regulatory view on the use of artificial intelligence. What we recommend is, you should not, if in the old days, I didn't keep recordings of all my conversations with my clients. I didn't keep transcripts of all my conversations with my clients. And in the new days, I should not be keeping all that necessarily, right? So working with an artificial intelligence firm to generate get the recording, generate a transcript, and then delete the recording and the transcript once it's been validated by a human in the loop, I think is really important. I'm going to just jump on a quick soapbox around human in the loop for a second. You need to define your processes. So if you're using an artificial intelligence tool, it doesn't replace your human. It increases their velocity, right? So they can do things faster. Instead of having 3 people in the room to take notes, you have 1 person in the room. You've increased the velocity that the firm can process things. The person that was in the room, though, still needs to read that transcript and read the summary and the notes and action items and everything that came out of it and say, yes, that accurately represents what we talked about in the meeting. So from a regulatory perspective, I think you've got some really good framework around this. If you didn't keep it before, you probably don't need to keep it moving forward. Number 1. Number 2, if you have a human in the loop, that should give you comfort that you don't need to keep these transcripts forever. And remember, if you've got it, it's admissible in court. So if you've got a transcript and that transcript, has something in it that was sensitive that you spoke to the client about, that you would not want plastered in Times Square on a billboard, it probably shouldn't be in your books and records. So be careful of that. So I think that from a regulatory framework, the last thing I'll say on this is you need to have a really solid AI acceptable use policy. You need to provide guardrails for your team that say, these are where we're going to acceptably use artificial intelligence, and here's where we're not going to use artificial intelligence. If you don't give them those guardrails, then you never know where they're going to be on the road. They could be completely off the road, and you have no idea because you haven't given them any guardrails. So I do think that you need to create an artificial intelligence acceptable use policy that clearly outlines where you're going to use it and where you're not going to use it. That forms, by the way, the basis of your regulatory framework. In almost any regulated industry, not just wealth management, anyone, if you've got a policy, you've taught people how to use that policy, you've gotten them to accept that they understand the policy, and you're operating by that policy, you're probably better off than 50 to 60% of the other firms that are out there anyway. So I think that if you're going to move into this territory and it's still unknown with the regulatory framework, taking those steps, I think, are going to position your firm very well, so that even as new regulations do emerge, you update your AI acceptable use policy, you retrain your team, you adjust some of your processes, but you're going to be in a much better position to react to regulations as they come out, as opposed to having to create things on the fly because a regulatory ruling came out.
All right, well, that looks like that is it for our questions today. So thank you both so much for this super insightful conversation. Hopefully it's been helpful for everyone, and appreciate your time today, and we'll catch you on the next webinar.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Chirag.
Thanks, Johnny. Thanks, John.
Have a good day.